Hi, so now I'm going to rehash some of the stuff that has been discussed on Monday and hopefully add a bit more on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So, this is the version that I've been reading from, and I realized that the one I sent you doesn't have the introduction that this has, which I like very much. So, on Monday, we discussed um, what kind of a difficult childhood Mary Shelley had and her relationship with her parents and then her lover and then husband and her relationship to birth in particular because her mother died soon after giving birth to her and she herself had children die at birth. So already this idea of creation is kind of problematic for her. Now, I will share with you this introduction. It's the 1831 introduction, in which she talks about the creative process. And I will read to you. She talks about, as I said, her relationship with Percy Shelley, the poet. And so there's one important bit in which he says, "And now, once again, I bid my hideous progeny go forth and prosper." Now, this is very interesting. So, hideous progeny. So, hideous means ugly, and progeny means progeny, offspring, basically, a child. So, she's referring to the book that she's written. So, she is kind of saying that this book is her child, and like some of the sort of some of the children she's had, basically, it's kind of malformed, and she's not sure whether this book will go forth and prosper. And go forth and prosper is also important because go forth and prosper, it's kind of this phrase that is from the Bible, when Adam and Eve go down from heaven, the paradise. So this is what God tells them: go forth and prosper. Basically, she's saying, telling. So she herself is assuming the role of God as and telling this thing that she has created, the book, to go and to go forth, and it's some kind of a blessing to go forth and prosper. So she's hoping that many people will read it. And she says, "I have an affection for it was the offspring of happy days, when death and grief were but words." So again, she's um, thinking about the past in which she was, but this is written after her husband has died. So she's reminiscing on the days in which she was with her husband. Now, we have discussed her parents. Mary Wollstonecraft is very, very important. So if you ever encounter a history of feminism in England in particular, and in writing, you will come across Mary Wollstonecraft's work. Both her parents were very French, for the French Revolution, and Mary Wollstonecraft wrote, firstly, The Vindication of Rights of Man, and then having written that, she wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women. So that's it's a very, very interesting text, and it's interesting in one aspect that I'm going to talk about as well, that Mary Wollstonecraft uses the Turkish Empire or the Turkish way of life as the antithesis of what women should aspire to. And hopefully some of you have read the novel from beginning to end. There's a very, very interesting use of Oriental themes, including Safiya, which I hope we'll talk about a bit more. Now, so Mary Wollstonecraft is celebrated as this mother of feminism because, well, just arguing for the rights of women, basically, nothing too radical. But Mary Shelley's work doesn't really appear in this kind of we call it, the silsila of I guess, a feminist writing, because I mean that's something that we can talk about, how the women in this um, uh, book, this novel, are pretty silent, and so and she has given a lot of voice to different um, different male characters. And here is something that we can talk about. This term that kind of freaked you out previously, heteroglossia, which I should make a note of. So one of the things we can consider is whether there is heteroglossia in this novel, in the sense that there are various narrators, and there were various people whose speech we hear. So we have Dr. Frankenstein, we have the monster, and it will be interesting um, to look at whether Mary Shelley has managed to give them different characters. So if you took a sentence out that the monster says, would you be able to tell it apart from a sentence that Dr. Frankenstein says? Do they use the same kind of language? Do they use the same kind of words? And if they do, what does that mean? If they don't, what does that mean? And this creation relationship, how is that? And it's all about how sort of in different cultures, humans have been taught speech by gods or God. So we are somehow actually repeating God's language. So we are using God's words as we speak, because we have, in the Islamic tradition, we have the Quran, and the Arabs are using the same words that are in the Quran. So it's a whole way of thinking about heteroglossia. Can we think of an essential heteroglossia? But that's another kind of linguistic discussion, I would say. But in any case, so she's not in this silsila of feminist writing. I guess she's more known as, one of the first authors of science fiction, and it will be interesting to ask ourselves, before we came to this novel, and I'm just guessing that some of you had heard of Frankenstein as this kind of monster. How many of us knew that the novel was written by a woman? So, we hear a lot of Frankenstein, but it's very rare that we discuss. In the general cultural realm, that we discussed that it was actually written by a woman. For instance, Dracula, I guess it's the same. We don't know who's written it, but I guess we just assume that it's written by a man. Now, having said that her work doesn't fall into this kind of feminist writing, so to speak. If you look at the text with with these glasses that you want to find out, if is there a feminist voice or a feminine voice coming out, and I would argue that there is, if we look for it. It's interesting, some of the feminine characteristics, some of the rights actually that sort of early feminists were fighting for, such as choosing your own husband, being able to marry for a romantic companionship. Those kind of themes will come up, and you can say, okay, so this is actually a translation of the current, or what women were talking about among themselves at the time. The matter of companionship comes across a lot, and this matter of companionship is also very, very important in Jane Austen as well. So there's that. So we can sort of say that she doesn't fall into the sort of feminist discourse, but we can read for the feminine in her writing. So we talked about on Monday. We talked about the connection between Prometheus and how light was given to man by Prometheus, and maybe more importantly, how this fire, this light, was used for not such good purposes, such as making war. So, and already in the Greek version of this tale, of this science progression, uh, there's already a kind of a negative aspect to it. And this negative aspect of science has always been with us, with humans. And there was never a time when humans didn't discuss um, the the bad effects of some of the um, technological progress that we make. I guess nowadays, what are we talking about? We're talking about all the pollution that the factories create, but more in line with Frankenstein, maybe these days we're talking about artificial intelligence, right? I mean, this is what we are very interested in. We will be sort of losing our autonomy to machines, that sort of thing. So in the 1800s, this kind of fear, this kind of discussion, sort of, we can say, it manifested itself in novels like Frankenstein. And it's a very interesting period. They're discovering the human body, they're mapping up the human body. And there are all these kind of witch doctors going around doing all these kind of very interesting experiments with electricity. And there's this guy, a doctor called Dr. Galvani, who is kind of electrifying sort of dead bodies of animals, and then the animals are twitching. And people are very, very interested in when life ends, when life starts. Um, and where life exists in matter, basically. So it's a novel that really takes on that uh, fascination with the fine line between life and death that's raging at the time, and sort of making science the bogeyman, the frightening thing. Um, so yeah, electricity and sort of yeah, anatomy. These are important things. Uh, so if we do a close reading of the novel, um, the novel is written in a very traditional sense, in the sense that it's called epistolary novel, in which the novel is written through letters sent to different people. And it starts with a letter written by Walton, R. Walton, to his sister. Now, what is Walton doing? Again, it's part of this technological scientific exploration theme of the 1800s. They're trying to find a passage through the North Pole, which of course now with climate change, it has already happened that the ice is melting. So because it's kind of closer up there, it will be much easier to circumnavigate um, the Earth.